The cameras flashed inside the White House press room as Vice President Kamala Harris stepped up to the podium. She smiled, polished, practiced, confident, and spoke with her signature tone of moral authority. America teaches nations like Burkina Faso what freedom truly means. And we will continue to guide those who have not yet learned it. There were a few nods. A few gentle smiles. The room moved on to the next question as if it were just another polite statement in the theater of diplomacy. But it didn't land that way in Ouagadougou. Later that evening, Ibrahim Traoré sat in a simple wooden chair in the courtyard of the presidential compound. It was dusk, the air was still. A military aide handed him a tablet showing Harris's comments. He listened in silence. Replay, silence, replay again. Then he stood up, leaned forward slightly and said in a low, controlled tone. She says they teach us freedom. But they still haven't learned it themselves. He walked back inside. 15 minutes later, a short statement was released to national radio. Burkina Faso does not need lessons in freedom from those who still struggle to practice it. The sentence traveled faster than a formal speech ever could. Farmers repeated it in the fields. Students wrote it on chalkboards. News presenters ended their broadcasts with it, as if it were a pledge. That night, someone painted the words on the wall of the old colonial courthouse. You still haven't learned it yourself. Meanwhile, in Washington, Harris smiled when a reporter asked about Traoré's reaction. Well, she said calmly, rebellious leaders often confuse pride with progress. Traoré heard that too. He looked to his ministers and spoke 5 words, softly, but unmistakably. Then let's show her progress. The next morning, Harris appeared on a primetime news show to expand on her remarks. Sitting comfortably in a studio decorated with American flags, she leaned forward and spoke with a gentle smile. We understand that some young leaders feel confident and passionate, but freedom requires more than passion. It requires structure, discipline, and guidance, things the United States is proud to provide. In Burkina Faso, the clip went viral for all the wrong reasons. People didn't hear guidance, they heard instruction. Traoré convened a meeting, not in a conference hall, but in front of a new public health clinic being built entirely by local volunteers. He addressed workers, villagers, and elders together. They say we need structure and discipline, but we are the ones building clinics with our own hands. They say we need guidance, but we are the ones guiding ourselves out of the chains they left behind. A farmer raised his hand. Then what do we call freedom? Traoré didn't hesitate. Freedom is not taught. It is practiced. Later that evening, he spoke to the nation in a televised address, standing in front of the newly completed clinic. Our freedom is not in theory. It is in our work, in our unity, in our refusal to be lectured by those who still struggle to apply the very values they preach. Across West Africa, people shared the speech with a single phrase attached. Practice what you preach. In Washington, Harris was informed of the growing response. She gently laughed and replied to the press. Someday they will realize that our lessons were meant to help them, not control them. Traoré listened, and only replied with 5 calm words, we don't need your help. The backlash did not slow down. In fact, Harris's helpful guidance comment ignited an even larger wave across Africa. In Dakar, young people began posting short videos holding simple signs. Help is not freedom. In Ghana, university students gathered on campus and read passages from Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba, finishing each quote with the same words. We teach ourselves. Meanwhile in Washington, Harris doubled down. During a policy forum, she delivered a polished speech before a room of politicians and donors. If Burkina Faso truly wants to join the community of free nations, then its leaders must accept the principles that America has long taught: accountability, order, and democratic values. She paused for effect, confident that her words would resonate as truth. But in Ouagadougou, the response was immediate and very different. Traoré stood in an open field surrounded by local farmers repairing irrigation canals. He looked directly into a handheld camera and spoke calmly. Accountability? We account to our people every day. Order? We build it with our own hands on our own land. And if freedom must be taught by those who still haven't mastered it themselves, then it was never freedom at all. The recording went viral within hours. That night, street artists painted a massive mural across the wall of the old French consulate. It showed Harris smiling behind a podium, and Traoré standing in front of a line of villagers building a school. Across the mural, one sentence: "You lecture, we build." In Washington, a reporter asked Harris if she had seen the mural. She gave a tight smile and answered, "They can draw pictures, we'll continue shaping the real world." Traoré heard those words too. He turned to his cabinet and said quietly, "Then we will show her what the real world actually looks like." A few days later, the White House released a statement expressing deep concern over Burkina Faso's rejection of long-standing democratic partners. It warned that the country could face serious consequences if it continued ignoring the guidance of the international community. The same day, 2 development loans to Burkina Faso were quietly frozen. U.S. outlets framed the move as necessary pressure. But in Ouagadougou, it felt like something else altogether, a punishment for daring to speak. Traoré called a meeting with village leaders and representatives from youth organizations. They didn't discuss blame or fear, they discussed action. One young organizer stood up and said, "If they freeze our support, then our power must come from the people, completely." Traoré nodded and replied, "Then let us build what cannot be frozen." Later that afternoon, standing among volunteers repairing a damaged rural road, he addressed the nation. "They call it guidance. But guidance without respect is control. And anyone who freezes our future does not intend to teach freedom. They intend to stop it." Across the country, people mobilized. Farmers donated seed for community storage. Mechanics built small generators from recycled parts. Teachers agreed to work without pay if schools were cut off from funding. Someone painted new words across the courthouse wall, just above the old mural. "Freeze what you want. We don't learn freedom from ice." Back in Washington, Harris was asked whether the sanctions might push Burkina Faso further away. She smirked and said, "Sometimes tough lessons are the most necessary ones." Traoré didn't wait this time. He responded immediately in a live statement. "Then learn this lesson. Freedom is not taught through threats. It is proven through resilience. And we are still here." The next morning, photos of community-led construction projects began flooding social media, villagers expanding clinics with handmade bricks, youth groups installing locally built solar lights, grandmothers teaching children to read in makeshift classrooms built from old storage sheds. None of it came from aid. None of it came from guidance. Every photo carried the same handwritten phrase somewhere in the corner. Freedom isn't taught. It's practiced. The message reached South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and eventually, even the United States. Harris was asked during a press pool Q&A if she had seen the images. She gave a quick nod and answered calmly, "We support any effort that leads toward real freedom and democratic values. Even if some leaders don't always see the value of our help." The comment sounded reasonable to many viewers, but in Ouagadougou, it landed with a different weight. Traoré read the transcript quietly and then joined a group of students clearing land for a new technical training center. Someone brought him a shovel. He didn't speak. He simply began working beside them. A journalist approached and asked, "Will there be an official response to the vice president's comment?" Traoré kept shoveling and answered without looking up, "The work is the response." That one sentence was filmed and shared through thousands of accounts across the continent. By that evening, the phrase had become a movement slogan. The work is the response. Murals were updated. Banners appeared over highways. Radio hosts repeated the words at the start of each broadcast. And in Washington, Harris paused when she saw the phrase trending. For the first time, her confident smile faltered, just for a moment. She realized something. They were no longer arguing. They were building. As the weeks passed, Washington expected the pressure to wear Burkina Faso down. It didn't. Instead, a new kind of momentum emerged. In the capital, neighborhood councils formed spontaneously to organize food distribution. In rural areas, volunteer teachers traveled village to village teaching children in open-air classrooms. A network of young engineers published open-source plans for affordable water systems using local materials. Across every province, the same phrase kept appearing on banners, shirts, and painted walls. The work is the response. It wasn't a protest anymore. It was governance. Harris, now facing questions from international journalists, tried again to frame the U.S. position. Look, we admire the initiative being shown. But freedom without partnership isn't sustainable. If President Traoré truly believes in democracy, he should welcome the support and guidance of nations who built it. In Ouagadougou, Traoré received the transcript with a quiet shake of the head. He addressed the nation again, standing not in front of the palace, but among volunteers laying the foundation of a new school. Freedom without partnership is sustainable. So long as the partnership is built on respect, not instruction. We welcome allies. We will not accept tutors. That evening, the people answered on their own. At sunset, they placed lanterns in front of every building that had been rebuilt without foreign aid. Across the city, hundreds of points of light appeared, each one marking a place where freedom was being practiced rather than lectured. Drone footage of the lights went viral around the world. Someone added a caption to the video. "You teach with words. We teach with light." Harris watched the video from her office in silence. For the first time, she didn't have a response. The drone footage of Burkina Faso illuminated by lanterns sparked a powerful ripple across the world. In Brazil, activists projected Traoré's quote on a government building. In India, college students organized a Night of Lights in solidarity, lighting candles and repeating the words, "We will not accept tutors." Suddenly, what began as a local response to a condescending remark had evolved into an international conversation about dignity, agency, and the meaning of freedom. In Washington, Harris met with advisors behind closed doors. One of them quietly suggested pulling back from public criticism. "We're losing the narrative," he admitted. Harris sighed and leaned back in her chair. "They're turning defiance into an example," she said softly. Meanwhile in Ouagadougou, Traoré returned to a rural village where a small survey station had been converted into a solar station. The villagers offered him a seat but he waved it away and helped unload supplies from a truck. A child nearby looked up and asked, "Monsieur President, do you think they're watching?" Traoré paused, then knelt down to be eye level with the boy. "Yes. And that is why we keep building. So they finally understand that freedom must be lived, not taught." The boy nodded and returned to helping carry bricks. Back in Washington, a journalist asked Harris whether she believed the people of Burkina Faso understood the importance of American democratic values. Her response was brief but telling. "The question is not whether they understand our values. It's whether we are willing to understand theirs." For the first time, her voice carried doubt, not certainty. As the weeks passed, the shift became impossible to deny. International media outlets began changing their tone, no longer portraying Traoré as a rebellious leader, but as the architect of a new model of sovereignty. An editorial in The Guardian asked openly, "Has the West confused leadership with authority, and ignored the possibility that others can lead themselves?" In Ouagadougou, community leaders assembled once again, this time to draft a national charter of civic responsibility written entirely by citizens. It began with the sentence, "Freedom does not need permission, only purpose." When the charter was finished, Traoré refused to sign it alone. He invited a farmer, a teacher, a mechanic, and a student to sign beside him. The photo of those signatures became the most shared image across West African social media that week. Back in Washington, Harris was asked if she had any comment on the charter. She paused for a long moment and then said, "If people build their democracy with courage and dignity, perhaps our role isn't to guide, but to respect." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she had come. That night in Ouagadougou, a new mural appeared next to the courthouse wall. It showed Traoré lifting a lantern high while others built around him. Underneath, a single line: "Freedom cannot be taught, but it can be witnessed." The next morning, West African radio stations played an audio clip of Kamala Harris's recent statement. "Perhaps our role isn't to guide, but to respect." People paused when they heard it, not as a victory, but as an acknowledgement. For the first time, the voice that once lectured now seemed to listen. Traoré was in the northern province, standing inside a half-finished school where villagers were laying tiles. When someone played the clip for him, he didn't react with pride. He simply nodded and placed another tile in the floor. "Respect is not a favor," he said quietly. "It is the beginning." That sentence became the next phrase people wrote on doors, notebooks, and banners. Respect is the beginning. International journalists arrived in Ouagadougou expecting tension. Instead, they found calm. They found people working, building, teaching, without aid, without instruction. One reporter asked a local volunteer why they kept building even with sanctions in place. She smiled. "Because freedom doesn't wait for permission. And dignity doesn't pause for politics." In Washington, Harris held a final press conference on the matter. There was no smirk this time. No lecture. "We may have underestimated the strength of a people who refuse to be guided, and instead choose to guide themselves." Her words were replayed in villages across Burkina Faso. But this time, no one cheered. They simply kept working. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, lanterns once again illuminated the streets. But this time, they weren't a declaration of defiance, they were simply a quiet reminder of what had been achieved. In the center of the old colonial square, people gathered without speeches, banners, or media. They brought tools, food, and music. Children played near the school that had been rebuilt by their parents. Elders sat beneath newly planted trees, their faces calm, their voices soft. Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward, not as a commander or politician, but as one member of the community. He looked around, not at a crowd waiting for orders, but at a people who had learned to move forward without them. "They said they would teach us freedom," he said gently. "But freedom cannot be taught. It must be lived, together." He paused and looked toward the lanterns, the rebuilt roads, the clinics, the classrooms. His voice remained steady, quiet, and deeply certain. "Let them talk of guidance. Let them speak of lessons. We have learned all we need to know. And we have learned it from our own hands. Our own will. And our own people." The crowd didn't cheer. They simply placed their hands on their hearts and stood in silence, as if recognizing their own reflection for the first time. In Washington, Kamala Harris watched the footage on a muted screen. There were no advisors in the room. No reporters. Just her and the image of a nation standing on its own. She exhaled slowly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Because for the first time, she understood. They didn't need a teacher. They just needed to be left alone to build. And in Burkina Faso, the people did not ask for applause. They simply kept living their freedom. They told us we needed their lessons. They warned that freedom only comes from those who claim to understand it. But we discovered something far more powerful. Freedom is not taught. It's built. Brick by brick. Voice by voice. Step by step. So while they kept talking about guidance, we kept working in silence. And in that silence, we found our own definition of freedom. Let the world hear this clearly. We don't need teachers. We need respect. And we are strong enough to stand without either.